Chris, what's in your mind when you think of these days, where might people want to deploy models?
Yeah, I think so. It's one of those situations where a lot of people I'm talking to are trying to decide between cloud environments, and we're seeing some people that had dived into cloud pulling back and investing in their own, and as well as starting to explore some of the other chip offerings. So people are kind of reconsidering that, go cloud when it's too big for you now, and looking at these open models in their own hardware and trying to figure out, okay, I don't really know how to do that at this point. So that's where I'm really curious is, let's say that we go ahead and buy, a reasonable GPU capability in-house, but it's not too big. What can I make of that? If I'm willing to do a little bit of investment, but not, we're not talking millions and millions of dollars kind of thing.
Yeah. So it might be good for people to kind of categorize the ways that you might want to deploy an AI model for your own application. And even before I give those categories, I think I also normally recommend to people that I think still the best way to think about deploying one of these models, if you're deploying it to support some type of application in your business or for your own personal project or whatever it is, any type of scale, I think you're going to save yourself a lot of time by thinking about the deployment of the model as a REST API, and then your application code connecting to that model, or a REST API or a gRPC API or whatever type of API you want. But the purpose of the model server is to serve the model. And then you have your application code that connects to that. Now, that could be running on the same machine or the same VM as your application code, or it could be running on a different one. But as soon as you make that separation a little bit, I don't really promote people, microservice everything, but I think in terms of model serving, it's useful because you can take care of the concerns of that model, maybe the specialized hardware it's running on, and then take care of the concerns of your application separately. And if your application is a front-end web app or is something written, an API written in Go or, Rust or whatever it is, then you don't have to worry about like, oh, how do I run this in a different language or that sort of thing. You just handle that through the API contract. So that's maybe one
kind of classical separation of concerns, that any developer would be doing.
Yep, exactly. And then you can test each separately, all of that good stuff.
Sure.
But if we think about the categories of how you might deploy these things, there's the case where you would want to run this in a serverless way. Like we already talked about what Cloudflare just released, but there's a whole bunch of these options like Cloudflare and Banana and Base 10 and Modal and a bunch of different places where you can spin up a GPU when you need it, and then it shuts down or scales to zero afterwards. And so depending on the size of your model and how you implement it, the sort of cold start time or the time it takes to spin up that model and have it ready for you to use might be somewhat annoying for you, but the advantage is you're not going to pay a lot. So you could at least try that first. There's kind of this more and more offerings in that space, but a lot of them have Base 10, the Cloudflare thing, whatever it is, you're going to be running it in someone else's infrastructure. So if you have like your own on-prem thing or something like that, maybe a little bit harder to deploy that sort of serverless infrastructure because they've optimized those systems for what they are. So likely in that scenario, you're signing up for an account on one of these platforms and you're deploying your model there, and then you can interact with it when you want. A second kind of way you could do this is like a containerized model server that's running either on a VM or a bare metal server that has an accelerator on it, one or more accelerators on it, right? And so you could spin up an EC2 instance with a GPU, or you could even run this as part of a auto scaling cluster that's like a Kubernetes cluster or something like that. But these would be VMs that have a GPU attached or something like that. And they would be probably up either all the time or up, and they would have uptime that's different from the serverless offerings.
Sure.
And so you'd just be paying for that all the time. And in those cases, like maybe you could use a model packaging system, like Base10's Truss is one that I use, but there's other ones as well, Selden and others that will actually create a model package in a Dockerized way that allows you to deploy your system.